Beat your ass and hide the Bible if God watching. Sometimes you gotta pop out and show niggas. Certified boogeyman, I'm the one that up to score with him. Walk him down whole time, I know he got some hoe in him. Pole on him, extort shit, bully the flow on him. Say Drake, I hear you like I'm young. You better not ever go to cell block 1. To any bitch that talk to him and they in love, just make sure you hide your little sister from him. They tell me Chubb's the only one that get your hand-me-downs. And party at the party playing with his nose now. And Baka got a weird case, why is he around? Certified lover boys, certified pedophiles. Wop, 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 wop. That fuck him up. Wop, 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 wop. I'ma do my stuff. Why you trolling like a bitch, ain't you tired? Trying to strike a chord and it's probably A minor.
How's it going, guys, and welcome back to another build video, this one on my Crackshot Amara build, a build focused, of course, on Jakobs and crit damage, going for those big nasty one-shots and, of course, spreading that AoE as far as possible to get the most value out of that single bullet. Now, while this is more of a for-fun build, that's not to say it's bad, as Amara does have some pretty cool interactions and some fun playstyles when it comes to one-shot focused weapons. So let's get on into things here, starting out with our stills. And first talking about our action stills, where the main focus is, of course, ties that bind. You grab that main target, you shoot him in the head, all that damage is going to be spread out to nearby targets, which of course is playing into that, getting the most bang for your buck on that one bullet. And then also take stillness of mind, as it just is very nice synergy to hold them in place with ties that bind to guarantee that damage and that they don't walk out of range. And while we do have access to every element, the generic one I tend to run the most is Cold-Hearted for that cryo damage, but it does kind of just depend on the types of enemies that you're going to be taking on. Now, this is just our mobbing setup for our action stills because we do actually change it up for bossing, which I will talk about more, but generally I'll just swap to Fracture. Doesn't really matter what augment you use, as you're just going to cast Fracture twice and get going, and then you can of course change your element to match whatever you need. Now, moving to our actual still trees, we'll start with Red Tree, where it's a pretty generic still setup. There's not really anything too crazy going on here. The standouts that I would like to talk about is Steady Hands, which is a very nice still because we are going for those sniper rifles and just one-tap focused pistols. The less shots we're missing, the better, which of course means accuracy and handling is a pretty nice stat to have. While this kind of is just spent here more so to go down the tree, this is the best value that we can get out of these 3 points. Now, coming to Deep Well, this isn't very necessary as a lot of Jakob's weapons aren't elemental, but there are a few exceptions to that, like the Wedding Invitation or the Companion, and in those cases it is kind of worth just picking up because it is a 1-point still. It's not too heavy of an investment. We also grab Dread here, which is actually a bit of a 2-parter still. We get that gun damage, which does actually stack, and since we do use Avatar in our blue tree, we can get 30% gun damage out of this, which is pretty damn nice for Amara. But on top of that, when you kill the enemy that you have grasped, your weapon is instantly reloaded, which is incredibly nice to have, as there is a lot of Jakob's weapons that have some pretty bad reload times. And then 3 points into Indiscriminate, of course, more ricochet damage. Again, theme of the build, spreading that bullet as far as possible, and Indiscriminate does just that with some crazy mayhem scaling damage on top of it. And then of course 1 point sustainment. You don't really need more than this 1 point. Sustainment unfortunately isn't that great on this build though, and it is worth keeping in mind if you're caught in a reload, you are vulnerable because lifesteal only works as long as you are actually firing your gun and dealing damage onto an enemy. So while this is definitely still worth picking up, as a single shot from a Jakobs is going to fill your health back to full, it is important to keep in mind that even with this is not as strong of a skill as it usually is. And then with Wildfire, Catharsis, and Conflux, I went for a 2-1-3 spread. It doesn't really matter how you do this. I wouldn't generally recommend more than 1 point in Catharsis at the very least, but this is mostly just to move down, but it is kind of nice with Harmageddon as well. Now to our second largest tree, there is a little bit of a shake up here. Of course, generic Do Harm, 1 point Violent Tapestry just to help get stacked up on those rush stacks. Transcend, a very solid still, as it does give us critical hit damage. Worth noting with this is what it doesn't say on the card is that this does actually stack twice, and since we are using Avatar, we can get this to stack up to that 2 times for that 54% critical hit damage total and a very nice accuracy bonus. This is an incredibly good still, especially for what we're doing here. Laid Bear I do take because despite this being a Ties That Bind focus build for mobbing, where Laid Bear does not activate on Ties That bind stills, this is a very good still for bossing, and it does give us a 25% completely multiplicative increase. The only thing that this still is really additive with is like Harmageddon. So this is an incredibly nice bonus, and it does activate for bossing when we're using Fracture. But then where things get a little different is we don't actually take Awakening, because realistically what Awakening does is in a usual build, it just gives you added do harm stacks, which is nice with Ties That Bind, as that does feed into the Ties That Bind damage. I prefer to instead put these 3 points into Alacrity. This is personal preference. If you don't really care about this reload speed, then you can just throw it into Awakening, but I think just because we are using Jakobs often do have some slower reloads, which this can help remedy very well. Which you could put these points into Fast Hands as well, which is a bit more of a consistent still, but you do get less reload speed out of, though this does give you weapon swap speed, which can also be nice. And then of course, 1 point Remnant. It's an Amara build. We're going blue tree, you're getting Remnant. It's just how it be. And the rest of our still trees are pretty small. Personal space, just a nice damage bonus. We are using snipers, so you are generally further away from your targets, but this is a nice V2 damage bonus, meaning it's multiplicative with a lot of our other damage bonuses. And the distance on this is actually pretty damn big, and in most engagements, if not literally every single one, even while sniping, you will be getting some bonus damage out of this. I then put 2 points into Clarity just to move down, and 5 points into Arms Deal. This not only does just give us splash damage, as some Jakobs weapons do deal splash damage and can benefit from this, but it helps us get down to Fracture. And Purple Tree, Heavy Rain is just more splash damage. The projectile speed is also pretty damn nice, as it can help just feel a little bit more consistent in your aim. And then we are left with 3 extra points at the end of everything, and we could kind of put these anywhere. I just kind of like doing Go With The Flow, as I do use Cryo most often. I will be freezing enemies decently enough that I do get this gun damage every so often. It does have some pretty solid uptime on it, so I think it's just the best place for these 3 points. But if you don't want them here, you don't need them to get cold-hearted, you could just put them back into a different tree. But that about does it for our stills. So coming over to our gear, of course for our weapons, we're just using Jakobs. Some standouts that I do really like are the Headsplosion and the Wedding Invitation, especially the Wedding Invitation, as it is both elemental damage and splash damage, but the Headsplosion is still very nice, as Amara can just apply elemental damage to anything anyways, and it is also splash damage, meaning both these guns are getting the absolute most out of the kind of damage formula that we've set up here. But maximizing that isn't everything here, as I do love the Bird of Prey and the Ionic Disruptor, as these are just incredibly strong sniper rifles, along with the Unseen Threat just being an incredibly fun one while also being strong. Now while it's not a Jakobs, I do really love the Moonfire with this build, and I would definitely highly recommend it, but along with that for pistols, the Bloom is very good. When charged, this does deal splash damage. The Duck, of course, the Companion can be a really good time, and then you even have other options outside of just those more precision focused weapons. The Clairvoyance, the Garcia, the Hellwalker, of course. Pretty much any Jakobs gun that you want to use is going to be usable on this build. For anointments on our weapons, I do use ASE next to mags, bonus elemental damage. Mostly I just use Cryo, as it's a very good all-around element, but for something that deals splash damage like the Headsplosion, you could just use ASE Splash, as that does give you a little bit more damage over that bonus element. Now for our shield, I do use the Infernal Wish for most engagements, as it does actually outdamage the Revolter on single target, and of course the Revolter is an incredibly strong shield. You could just use this if you wanted to, but the Infernal Wish will give you more single target damage. Now the Revolter does potentially still overall total damage outdo the Infernal Wish, because this is a global element. It's going to be giving you more damage onto your Ties That Bind, but in mobbing situations, you don't really need that. At that point, it's extremely overkill, and just getting that one tap on your initial target is really what's going to be important, so I just find the Infernal Wish to kind of be a little bit better in most cases. That being said, I will use the Revolter if I'm using a faster firing weapon or something like a shotgun, of course, but even then, for multi-pellet weapons like shotguns, you could just use a one-shot or purple shield instead, as that will amp every single pellet and will be giving you quite a lot of damage on it. As for the anointment on these shields, of course, if you're using the Revolter, you're going to want to use Aspirate, but then for the Infernal Wish, I tend to carry around one with ASE of each element, just to be able to swap between, not only for mobbing areas, but also for bosses. For a grenade, you have some options here, like maybe a Mesmer or something if you just want more utility, but I do just prefer the Piss, as it is a debuff. It slots in very nicely. It helps us for that goal of just dealing a lot of damage in one shot. And for the anointment on here, you can kind of just use either On Grenade Throw or some sort of ASE element. On Grenade Throw gives 25% V2 damage, while the ASE gives 50% elemental damage. Both of these end up being pretty similar damage increases, so it kind of just depends on what you're doing with what you want to focus in on. If you are going to be using an ASE element though, make sure that it is a different element from what you have on your shield, as they do not stack if they are the same element. common, but I tend to just carry around all sorts of variants as I can just swap between them freely. For our class mod, for mobbing, I generally use a phase Zerker. Of course, here ideally you want to get that sniper damage roll or a pistol damage roll, or really whatever you're doing, as that is V2 damage. And then you could also roll crit damage, splash damage, anything like that would be fantastic. The still rolls don't really matter, as the phase Zerker kind of doesn't roll anything too great. I do really like rolling clarity, as it does just give a little bit of health regen for while you're reloading, but this is my go-to for mobbing. However, you could also use a Death's Blessing. I've played around with this a bit. It works perfectly fine, a fantastic option. I'm just not totally on board with it, as it does feel a little bit inconsistent to me at times. And our relic, I generally just run the Jacob's Company Man. Of course, getting that damage, crit damage, and mag size roll is ideal. Unfortunately, mine kind of has some weak passives on it, but you can definitely get better ones than this. But if you want a more general option, you could use the Icebreaker Victory Rush or a Pearl of Ineffable Knowledge. Both of these are pretty solid options, but if you're using Jacob's weapons specifically, the Company Man will be the best. Now when it comes to bossing, we do switch things up here. Of course, as I mentioned, we are using Fracture when we boss, which means I do swap over to that Face Slam weapon damage on my kick chargers, which is my weapon of choice for this build for obvious reasons. Very strong, single shot, very high damage, fits the theme, also just a batshit broken option, especially when you're slapping 300% weapon damage on top of it. It's going to be taken off the head of pretty much any boss where you can hit the crit. But for cases where you can't hit their crit, I would recommend just carrying around a Plague Bearer or a Backburner. For our shield, again, I stick with the Infernal Wish if they just have a very big health bar of a single type, but if they have a big shield bar or a mix of a shield bar and something else, the Revolter will most likely be better. For our class mod, I do swamp over to a Mantis, which gives us a +3 into Transcend, which gives us a massive bonus of 54% critical hit damage with a single stack, but at 2, that is of course going up to 108% crit damage, which when you have that stuck on top of 300% weapon damage from Face Slam, ain't nothing eating this tick charger shot. Now I did actually try to set up the build around this originally with that 300% Face Slam damage on top of that insane crit damage. Unfortunately, since the Mantis doesn't have any sort of cooldown rate on it, it's really not survivable enough, and you kind of just end up needing Phase Lock to really do much, which does kind of suck, but it is fun to be able to whip this out to just immediately annihilate any boss you pointed at. And then of course for our relic, we're using a Toboggan just to really ramp up that one-tap potential. Getting that AoE damage in the roll is really nice as well. But yeah, slide, get your tick charger, tap their head, and they're gonna die. But yeah, that's gonna about do it for Crackshot Amara. Again, this is more of a for fun build. It's definitely not her most effective option, and she's definitely not the most effective sniper character, but she can do some really fun things with sniper rifles that not many other characters are able to. Between Ties That Bind and Indiscriminate, it's really fun to get that grip and just immediately nuke an entire area with a single shot from a bird of prey. But as always, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, definitely consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, all of that. I'll be live right after this video goes up, right here on YouTube, but also over on my Twitch channel, where there will be a link to down in the description below, and just under that is a link to my Discord server where you can come and join and hang out. But with that all being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.